to the inspir'em webinar series this afternoon. Lovely to have you all on with us. I'll shortly be introducing Mike Slater, who'll be talking to us today about champion to economic buyer. But before I do that, just a couple of quick updates from us this afternoon. So for those of you who haven't been on one of these webinars before, I'm Emma Maslen, I'm the CEO of inspir'em. We do a series of 6 webinars 3 times a year. Today, we're going to be getting close to the end of the Champion series. We've got one left after this, which is the 4th of July. Apologies to our US listeners. We'll be putting it on record afterwards, so don't worry if you feel like you're going to miss it. We'll then be taking a break for the summer, and we will be doing a decision process mutual success plan series, which will run from the 12th of September up till Christmas. So put the date in your diary. If you go into the inspir'em community, you can actually see all the webinars listed. If you've got any challenges with seeing those or getting those into your calendar, let us know and we'll help you out with that. Just one other plug I've got just before we get going today. We've kicked off our Women in Sales community and our leadership series that's kicking off on the 1st of July. We've already got 100 females that are already registered for that webinar, so we've had a really great uptake for that. Please do feel free to have a look at the Women in Sales leadership webinar series. If you don't have to be female, if you're an ally, then absolutely you're very welcome too. It's just an hours long webinar that will be in a couple of weeks. So Lucy will be putting the details in the chat. Interestingly, you've already got some chat going on actually, Mike. So Paul Bidder says hi. So there's obviously going to be some friends here for you today. So welcome to the webinar, Mike. We're going to get started and talk about a champion to economic buyer. But for those people who don't know who you are, Mike, it'd be great to have a bit of a background from you. Where have you been? What have you been doing? What are you up to now?
Great. Well, thanks, Emma, for having me on. So I've been in IT sales, software sales primarily for about 30 odd years, 25 years in sales leadership. I think like you, when I was very young in my 20s, I was lucky enough to have really high quality training. It wasn't MEDDPICC or MEDDPICC training at the time, but it was with CompuWare. Same kind of principles though, in terms of qualifying the decision process, identifying pain, getting to the right people. So I think that really, I guess you could say, brainwashed me to do what I now call our best practice sales execution. And then still at quite a young age, I went into sales leadership at the age of 29. And that's when I started to realize that not everybody does these things that well. And you start to, you actually improve what you do when you coach other people. So I think that helped me as well. And then I went on after about 8 years at CompuWare. I went on to many other organizations, leading large teams at IBM or to SAP, where we first met. Then some global roles at mid-tier organizations like Unit 4 and Software AG, and then lately some smaller private equity-backed businesses. And now I essentially am an operating partner for, they call me a CRO operating partner, to help the Carlyle portfolio companies working with their CROs, CEOs on how to optimize their go-to-market strategy and essentially get their sales team to be able to sell better. Great background there. So some interesting perspectives that we're going to sort of delve into today. Certainly one of the reasons why I asked Mike to come on to the webinar today is not only because he'll have seen it from the perspective of being a seller and being a leader and making sure that we do absolutely get to economic buyers for reasons we're going to talk about. But also, Mike, you've also been an economic buyer yourself, being a CRO and CEO, and some of the things that have happened there, good, bad, and indifferent, by vendors that have come to you as well. So we may well get to some of those stories today as well. So, Joe, go on. No, you're right, because it does give you a different perspective when you're the person that is being sold to and trying to get things over the line in your own organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's kick off then. So let's start with the real basics then. From your perspective, you've worked in a lot of big organizations, you run a lot of large forecasts. What are the key points you think are around getting to the economic buyer? So why bother? Because it's quite hard, isn't it?
It is hard, but so obvious. I mean, when you ask the sales teams, even the teams that I've worked with today, why do you win and why do you lose? Typically, the kind of answers are, well, it's when we get to all of the right people, then our deals land. Why did you lose? As long as they're not assuming it's price or technology, they will often say it's because I didn't get to the right person. And we all know, we've all been there. After a deal that's been in the forecast and it hasn't closed, then we realize the reason it hasn't closed is the person who was ultimately signing it off decided it wasn't important enough, or they had a different agenda, or just weren't close enough to it and didn't feel that pain enough to get things signed. So, leaving out the economic buyer from your sales cycle is just a huge risk. I mean, you can have a great champion and hopefully they can get it over the line for you, but you're missing the economic buyer, then you sort of have a sales strategy of hope. And on the balance of probabilities, there's more likelihood that there are things you won't find out if you don't meet them than if you do. I think the most important thing to remember is if you think about what would your boss say to somebody trying to sell you something, they're probably going to give you a very different perspective than what you would. And that's the same for an organization you're selling to. So your champion or coach might be telling you one thing, but the economic buyer has a very different lens. So you need to know that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in our experience, that is, what we talk to people about, because our job in sales is revenue with control. If there's a key person that's part of that sales cycle that you've not met, then you've lost a level of control there because there's absolutely risk. And the crazy thing is when you go and see an economic buyer, they give you unbelievable clarity around what an organization is trying to achieve and the things that are a priority. And they're usually just really great conversations about business and about what's going on in their business and what's important to them, with all of the different priorities that are going on. So, so just on that then, because we've talked a little bit already about it's difficult to go and get one of those meetings. So, what are the sorts of obstacles that you see most frequently, and any tips for getting over those obstacles?
Well, the biggest obstacle is the salesperson. Usually the salesperson has some kind of anxiety or fear and thinks that they're not worthy of meeting the economic buyer. And so they introduce their own kind of procrastination or justifications why now isn't quite the right time. But, you just do your best not to put it on the too hard pile. But if you're asking how do you get to the economic buyer, which I think is your real question, the number one thing is to test your champion. You use your champion to get you to the economic buyer. And if they can't get you to the economic buyer or won't get you there, then you really have to question, are they really a champion? But a good champion will be able to get you access to that economic buyer. You can also test the champion by asking, who else in addition to you has the ear of the economic buyer? So there'll be a few people that the economic buyer just has that trusted relationship with. So if they're hearing it from a couple of people, then they're much more likely to be interested in meeting with you. But at the end of the day, you're doing a lot of work in that organization. Sometimes, you can have very complex sales cycles that could be 6, 9, 12 months. I mean, how crazy is it that you would wait until the very end of the sales cycle to meet the economic buyer, or just to hope that all of this work meets with their approval? So often it is just as simple as just saying that we've been doing a lot of work within your organization. You may be aware, but I'd love to just update you with the work that we're doing to make sure it meets with your approval. And it sounds so simple, but that's usually enough of a win and enough curiosity for them to want to meet with you if you're not doing that through your champion. And quite frankly, it's just a courtesy. I mean, how rude is it that you're spending all that time in that organization using that economic buyer's resources up to meet with you, and you haven't had the courtesy to make them aware of what you're doing? So I almost feel it's like our duty to make you aware as a courtesy. And if what you're doing matches the top priorities of that economic buyer, then they'll be happy to meet with you. And then, of course, sometimes you have to use a bit of pageantry, bring in the senior execs. The power of the title does make a difference. So if it's the CEO giving that message to the economic buyer, that has a lot more weight than if it's, just an account manager. I say just an account manager, but from their perspective, and they don't know you, they might perceive that they want somebody that's like a peer-to-peer relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So some really interesting points I'll just pick up on. So I think just to your very first point there, which is it's incumbent on us to try. The thing is we can talk all day long about going to meet with an economic buyer, but if we're actually not going to ask for the meeting, then there's probably a fairly good chance we're not going to get that meeting unless we ask for it. So we ought to really just give it a go and just see if we can make it happen. And just to your second point as well around, it's really not to, particularly with long sales cycles. I was very blessed in my early stages of my career that I worked with quite a formidable CIO at one of the investment banks. And he used to talk about how people would steal resources from the bank by going and vendors talking about things that were not on his priority list. So he wanted to know what vendors were talking about. He wanted to know POCs and pilots, those sorts of things, because he saw it as almost a means of stealing productivity if it wasn't on the top list. So he would have absolutely agreed with, why wouldn't we do that? But I do want to just pick up on your final point there about almost the imposter syndrome. I think sometimes as salespeople, particularly, I think this is a very UK based thing that in other cultures as well, that we don't consider ourselves worthy to maybe that we've not got enough value to go and add for an economic buyer. But my experience has been that actually you've got lots of value to add. Do you see that a lot? The salespeople have got that imposter syndrome. They're not thinking about their own value.
Yeah, exactly. They put it on what I call the too hard pile, or do it later pile. And it happens in all walks of life. Even if you're doing a cold call, sometimes you put it off because you're a little bit worried about how it's going to go. Asking a girl out that you fancy, you're a little bit worried you might get rejections. You don't do it. It's a little bit like that. So, but at the end of the day, they are just human beings, and provided what you have to tell is of value to them, they'll want to meet with you, as you just said. If you're not clear on the value that you can give them, well, then maybe you don't even have a deal. Maybe you should question what is it that you're trying to sell, and if it's just a nice to have, is this really going to land?
Yeah. And I think just to your point there about, we talk a lot about holding up the mirror, thinking about what your pitch is to go and meet with the economic buyer, because the thing is if your pitch is very technical, it's very in the weeds, and you can hear yourself saying that, and you're probably thinking, actually, the economic buyer is not really not going to be that interested in this, then you know what the answer is. You need to up level that and get it to the point where they are interested in it for sure. So, but absolutely making sure that your pitch is right, and maybe being honest with yourself about qualifying out potentially. So being an economic buyer previously then, in some of the roles that you've been in, what are some of the tips that you might have for if you are a salesperson that's going to meet with an economic buyer, things that you should really convey to that person when you're going to meet with them, maybe based on some of your good experiences and bad experiences in the past?
Yeah. So look, a little bit of what we just said, it's a courtesy. So you should make them aware of what's going on. And most C-level people are curious as to know what's going on in their organization. So we've already touched on that. But this is also where the I in MEDDPICC or MEDDPICC comes in, identifying that pain and truly understanding the business pain. Because if you can articulate that with clarity, and you can address the top business pain of the organization, ideally the economic buyer, then they have every reason to want to meet with you. Of course, you might want to use exec engagement for credibility as well. But always think about what would be a 10 out of 10 meeting for them. And actually, this is where you can use your champion, right? So what's a 10 out of 10 meeting for you as a salesperson, but also what's a 10 out of 10 meeting for the economic buyer? And if you ask the champion that question, they'll probably be able to articulate, well, he'll be interested or she'll be interested in this and this. And it's these kind of vendors that they're the ones that they really value and commit to. So obviously being in the advisory space, giving them something to help them address their top business pain that is going to help them feel they got true value out of that meeting. But often we go in and we just think, okay, we've done some research that this is on the annual report, so we can talk to that, but we don't really understand what's the top priority of that individual. But just asking questions, and you will soon find out, look, I understand this, and this is top priority to you. Is that correct? And then you can explain how you can address that problem for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a couple of really interesting points I'll come back to in just a second. If anybody's got a question for Mike, feel free to just pop it into the chat and we'll pick up some questions in a second. Yeah, just to that point around, just asking them the question. Also, you could be the most researched person with your champion and in terms of the organization. But what I've always found is when you go and meet with the economic buyer, because they're privy to so much different information than what everybody else is, often you will always learn something new. I went to meet with an economic buyer at a big telco once, and we thought we absolutely had the agenda licked. We knew what was going on in the organisation. We knew what it was selling to, and then we said to them, we think that these are your priorities. Can we just validate that's the case? And they said, well, actually, we're in the process at the moment of assessing some big M&A activity. Nobody else on the team had been aware of that. It was something completely left field. Actually, it turned out to be in our favour, so that was a positive thing. But those things absolutely happen as well. So important to have a think about that. And and you talked about the importance of preparing with the champion as well. So, what do you see that looking like in terms of, because often we get asked about, the specifics of the how, how do you go and prepare with a champion? What's some of the best preparation that you've seen from a salesperson preparing to go and meet with an economic buyer?
Well, a lot of them are, I guess, MEDDPICC principles. So if you can define the metrics, agree what their decision criteria looks like, and also the process, and you're using the meeting with the economic buyer to confirm that those make sense and address their problem. But that question, what's a 10 out of 10 meeting? It just gets people thinking, and sometimes they'll come up with a few things. Okay, is that a 10 out of 10? Will that economic buyer walk away thinking, right, I've got to do business with these guys? And if the answer is no, you've got to keep going, keep trying again. And you're right, sometimes there will be something left field, but at least you are coming prepared with the things that are more likely to resonate. And if there is something left field, then you'll have to handle that in that moment. But if they've accepted the meeting, there's a reason that they've accepted the meeting. So what is that reason? You can even ask them, you've taken this meeting with us, what do you want to get out of today?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of the questions that we recommend most, which is, when you have any customer meeting, just asking them why they took the meeting, particularly with the EB. We had Steve Mitchell, who's CFO of Redgate, join us for a webinar last year, and we recorded that. It's available on the platform if anybody's interested in listening back to that. So as a CFO, a large tech business, we talked to him about why he met with vendors that he'd not done business with, why he met with strangers. And he said there were specifically two things that he was very interested in. The first thing is if somebody that was within his sphere of influence that he rated recommended the meeting, they would get in his diary in a flash. And actually we found, because we were dealing with some people in his influence, we got a meeting within like 3 days. So that was the first thing. But the second thing was the fact that he said, people who speak my language, they're well researched, they understand what's important to me, and they knew what would be a good meeting for me. It was a short meeting. They absolutely delivered in that meeting, and absolutely I would meet them again. So really resonated with what you mentioned there. A couple of questions and comments that have come in from people. So B has said she absolutely agrees. She is her own worst enemy. So hopefully now she can get out of the way of her own success and perhaps do something different. But Chris from Disguise has asked a question, which is, when meeting with the economic buyer, in your experience, what are some of the key tells that they are bought in to the conversation?
Yeah, wow, good question. I think one of the mistakes, if I answer the question in a different way, one of the mistakes a lot of salespeople make is they assume it's like any other meeting. In other words, try and build relationship. They will ask some of the situational questions about what they're doing. And honestly, some of them like talking about themselves, but typically they just want you to get to the point. What is the point of the meeting? And don't be afraid to ask tough questions, like really, because these guys are used to it, right? Or girls, they are used to just getting to the point. Typically they have a driver mentality as well, and they just want to be a productive meeting. So I guess some of the tells would be if they're not responding or they're not committal to your direct question. So if you're trying to close a deal in the current quarter, just be clear. Look, this is our goal, and this is what we're working with the team on. So I want to be sure that you're comfortable with that, and there's nothing that will stop that from happening. Or you can't, and just sometimes it sounds scary, but they will probably respect that kind of question much more than someone that is at a more junior level. People more junior probably don't like those kind of questions more because they don't have the authority to answer it properly.
Yeah,
they can't give the commitment, where in theory the economic buyer can give the commitment. So if you're not having very, very succinct conversations about the next steps or what's important to them, then I guess that should tell that it's not really going well, or it may not even be an economic buyer.
yeah, absolutely. And like you say, in their preparation, because they don't take meetings lightly, if they are an economic buyer, they will have gone to the champion themselves or done some prep as well to say, why is this vendor coming to see me? What's happening? I mean, if they haven't done a little bit of recon on you as well, then you probably know that you're in trouble. Just to Chris's point, what I've seen with some economic buyers before is that you have a meeting and then partway through the meeting, they get interrupted and potentially your meeting gets cut short, and it's very staged that those things happen because they're deliberately set to then take them off to something very important, which is their cue to just disappear. So it depends on who you're dealing with, for sure.
Very interesting. Yeah, and but just make sure you're talking about next steps and actions, because an economic buyer, if they get it, they'll be, yeah, fine, right, we're going to do this, and we'll get it done. If it's very interesting, like what you said, and there's no clarity of what the next action is, then that's also a big red flag.
Yeah. So I have a question for you then, just go back on the point that you made earlier around, so if meeting with an economic buyer, like why would you wait until the end of the sales cycle? What would be your recommendation then? If you're thinking, what are the key points to go and meet with an economic buyer, do you think? Or what's optimal?
Honestly, as soon as possible, as soon as you've got something tangible to talk to them about. So there's lots of different steps in the sales process, but first of all, you've done your discovery and you've agreed a need, and then you find your champion. Once you found your champion and you are very clear on why this solves a business pain for the organization, that's the point to meet the economic buyer. So I'd even call it stage 3 rather than stage 6 or 7. So many times, and it's quite frustrating, but salespeople will assume they don't have that right. Maybe this is the imposter syndrome you talked about. They don't have the right to meet with the economic buyer until the very end of the sales cycle, right? Virtually to get things signed or a handshake, just a week or two before the deal's to close. And I just don't get that. I mean, ultimately, with a complex sales cycle, you want to meet with the economic buyer several times, not just once. And you want to meet with them as early as possible. So if you can meet with them early, I call it like the pre-close. Really, it's decision criteria, but you're asking them, okay, so this is addressing your number 1, number 2 business problem. They get it, they're bought in. What do you need to see to be able to move forward and to buy? So that will be decision criteria. That could be the business case. It could be some kind of trial demonstration. Fine. And specifically, what do we need to show there? And if we show that, is there any reason why you won't be moving forward? So you can pre-close or pre-qualify before you go through that process. And then you agree to meet them again once you've gone through the next step. So never leave an economic buyer meeting without agreement that you're going to continually engage with that economic buyer. it's amazing how many times we meet with them once. We're so thankful we've done that. We've even brought in
Yep.
C-level, and then we never meet them again. And what tends to happen is, the CEO, your CEO might call them a week before the end of the quarter because we're panicking a little bit. Can you help us? And that's not really, you want regular engagement. I mean, don't overdo it, but at least 3 or 4 times before the deal closes. And ultimately, if you are addressing the number 1 or 2 business problem, they're going to want that level of relationship and engagement. They're betting their transformation strategy on your organization. They're going to want to know that they can trust you and you're in it for the long haul. Yeah. So, again, this is what they want, not a favor that they're doing for you.
Yeah, all of those points really resonate. One of the stories that I often tell in the training that we do is a story that I had from where I was dealing with a big systems integrator back in the day. Had an opportunity to meet with the economic buyer post demo before we started developing a business case, did not take that opportunity and then rued it forevermore, because what we ended up doing was building a business case that actually didn't tick off anything on the economic buyers list at all. And by the time we got to the point where we were asking for the deal, we'd completely missed the mark and absolutely missed the boat. So why wouldn't you? Because actually the middle of the sales cycle is where you're going to do like the really hard stuff with lots of resources, expensive resources. Why wouldn't you be qualifying that? But like you mentioned, don't be afraid as well to go and see them at the beginning of the sales cycle. I've seen many great salespeople pipeline generate into the beginning of a sales cycle with the EB, because your value is your stories of success. They want to know what the industry's doing. They want to know what their competitors are doing. That's your value at that point. You might not have all of the answers to the relevance of their business, but you have got a lot of industry relevance. So if you know your stories, you know your value cases, then actually that can make something really interesting from an economic buyer in the very early part of the sales cycle.
Yeah, 100%.
Just one very quick question that we've got come in from Josh, just before we finish up. How quickly would you use an exec sponsor? Would you try and get an exec sponsor involved to sort of build momentum? So I think this is on the other side of things, is using your own C-suite to get some momentum. Is there a difference there in how you might play your own C-level people in?
It's so again, you would use them for peer-to-peer engagement. If, for example, you use your C-suite or exec at a very early stage, someone that's quite low level, it's just a coach. The risks are you sort of devalue the power or the pageantry of your executive. But bearing in mind, we want to get to the economic buyer as soon as possible, and you can use the leverage of the title of your exec. Do that as soon as possible as well, because it's building credibility, just so that you're sometimes you're creating the value or building the pain rather than you're only fulfilling the pain. So often you will need your exec to get those meetings. If you're lucky enough to get them by yourself, fine. If your champion is great, but even then, it will probably depend on how important the deal is to your organization. If it's a small, tiny deal and it's not a particularly important customer, you might want to use them in a slightly different way. But certainly if it's a strategic deal, why would you not have exec engagement as soon as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice there. Yeah, it's really important as well to build out multiple relationships on our side as well as the customer side, because then if you do need to navigate around some people, you've got more options, because we often hit blockers. Sometimes we bet on the wrong people. So if you've got multiple people on your side building out relationships as well, sometimes you can swerve some of those obstacles as well. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. Some really great words of wisdom there. So thanks very much for jumping on today.
Great. No, thank you for having me, and great to meet you and see you all on the call.